Perfect. So I will share my screen right now. So can you all see that?
Almost. Yes, we can. Yep.
Perfect. So thanks for coming to this training on Tiny Forest Carbon Storage Week and how to collect data on measuring the trees in your tiny forest so that we can do the calculations that we'll use to calculate the amount of carbon stored in the above ground biomass of the trees. So what I'm going to be speaking about today, I'm going to be going through what is a tiny forest, why carbon storage is important, and why this is one of the ecosystem services of tiny forests that we're trying to monitor to see how they provide that ecosystem service and what factors affect that ecosystem service, and what's Tiny Forest Carbon Week is, how to collect the data, and then how to get involved in Carbon Week. So first and foremost, you're going to need to know the date. And the date of Carbon Week, stick it in your diaries now. It's the 16th to the 24th of September, 2023. And so starting off, what is a tiny forest? Well, I'm sure some of you will have heard this before, and hopefully some of you are familiar and have been to a tiny forest. Maybe you've been to how many of you have actually been to a planting day? Has anyone been to a planting day? Alexander, Andrew hasn't, but Karen has as well. Awesome. So if you've been to a planting day, you'll know that these are really, really densely planted forests, and they're pretty small. It's amazing how small a tennis court can actually look, especially when it's a different shape than a tennis court. So it's 200 meters squared, which is about the same size as a tennis court. And we plant 600 different trees in the tiny forest at a distance of about 30 centimeters apart. And this is a methodology created by a professor called Akira Miyawaki in Japan in the 1970s. And he wanted to look at how can you reforest areas that have been hit by tsunamis and natural disasters like that, so that you can get mature forests much faster than through traditional methods. And so his methodology came up with an idea where you look at the soil and the ground preparation, and you ensure it has all the trees will have all the nutrients, that the soil is not too compact for them, things like that. And then you look at the tree species, and you plant a mix of tree species from each of the 4 canopy layers. So from the understory layer, the shrub layer, the understory layer, the subcanopy layer, and the canopy layer. And by planting them all this closely, you're mimicking the what happens if a tree falls in the forest and you get this light sort of air light hitting the forest floor, and all the seeds start to germinate as well, and they all pop up, all of the different forest layers at the same time, and they compete for light and they compete for the resources that they need to grow. And so that's kind of the theory behind the methodology. And so we try and mimic that. And one of the ways we've augmented the methodology a little bit to make it work better for urban environments and for the benefits that we're trying to provide in urban environments. And one of those augmentations is whereas Miyawaki would plant fewer species, they plant like about 7 species, I think, in a forest. We're planting often like 17 different species in our forest to try and maximize the biodiversity benefits. So yeah, so we plant these areas super densely, and then once they're planted, we do soil, we check the soil, we do some soil augmentation, we plant the trees, and we then cover it in a nice mulch layer. And that mulch layer tries to reduce the amount of growth from other plants that would compete with the trees that we're planting, but also so that as it breaks down, so just by being there, it'll encourage microorganisms and earthworms and things like that to start breaking it down, which will keep the moisture in for the trees under the soil, so the trees will have more access to water, and then it will, as it breaks down, it will bring more nutrients into the soil as well. So that's the idea with our planting method. And we like to say that we think this is going to be a new kind of urban nature-based solution and be part of the green infrastructure that makes up the urban landscape. And so to really understand like how it's operating in the urban landscape, and to make sure that we plant these forests in the best way possible for the needs of a particular community, the needs of an area, we have these monitoring programs that look at the benefits that the forest provides. So we call those ecosystem services, the benefits the forest provide. And then we can look at them across all of the different forests that we have in our network, as many as have data, and we can then pull apart different factors that might affect their success in different neighborhoods and different areas. So that's part of the big picture research that we're trying to do to understand how we can better build green infrastructure in our landscapes, and particularly, obviously, the Miyawaki forests. And despite lots of big claims about Miyawaki forests out there, we know that actually the evidence, the actual researched evidence behind those claims is often hit and miss, let's say. So why is carbon storage important? Well, as you know, we've been experiencing global temperature rises. Climate change is more and more in the news. We're experiencing higher and higher temperatures at the moment. You've had the wildfires in the news at the moment across southern Europe. And so one of the big causes of climate change is increases in atmospheric carbon. And we've got lots and lots of research from things like ice cores and things like that show that as you get increases in atmospheric carbon, you also see increases in global average temperatures. Trees have been identified as one potential way that we can sort of mitigate some of these effects, and we can store carbon, because they store carbon from the atmosphere. And they do this through a process called photosynthesis. So trees take carbon dioxide, which we breathe out. They take that in. They take water up from the ground as well. And they use the sun's energy to create a process to stimulate the reaction in the chlorophyll of the plant's leaves to produce oxygen and sugars, complex sugars that make up the branch and the woody matter that you see that the trees build. And so that's why our methodology is to look at the growth of the tree above ground and the height and the diameter. That's basically what we'll be going through it. It also obviously stores a lot of carbon below ground, but we don't measure that in this methodology. So we are very aware that our estimation of the amount of carbon stored in its biomass is an underestimation, because we're not taking into account the roots as well. So what's Tiny Forest Carbon Week? Well, it's a week where we encourage you, it's the end of the growing season for the trees, pretty much. So we encourage you guys to go out and collect en masse data on carbon storage from your tiny forests. And this helps us get this massive data that we really need to be able to start answering these questions about what factors affect Miyawaki forests and tiny forests, urban Miyawaki forests' opportunity to store carbon, what factors affect the growth rate basically of the forest and its ability to store carbon. So it's a week-long citizen science event. And it's across our growing network of tiny forests. So this year we have passed the 200 mark of tiny forests planted. We passed that, and we already have quite a few in the pipeline for next year. So we will be ticking up that number even more next year. It's a mass data collection event at the end of our growing season, and it's a unique opportunity for us to compare the growth across this network. And again, it's from the 16th to 24th of September 2023. And here on the slide here, you can see some of that growth rate that we talk about in Miyawaki forests. So they're meant to be exceptionally fast growing. You can see that with the top photo from May 2020, which was a few months after the Whitney tiny forest was planted, versus it in May 2022, and it's even higher now. We really need to update this photo to show you how much taller it is now. But yeah, they seem to be growing about a meter a year, a lot of the tiny forests at least. So that's really, really a fast growth rate. So how do we do it? Well, we have our resources online, and I'll take you through those on where you can find our resources with our monitoring protocol online. And we also have data sheets if you don't want to do it on the app. But I will show you it on the online, on the laptop version of the map. So if I just exit this, you will see my, let's move that away. You will see my, yeah, so first and foremost, where you can find everything. So if you go to the resources section of the Tiny Forest website, you will find monitoring survey guides and monitoring data sheets. Now, both of those, you can just click there, or you can just scroll down, and here are all our survey guides. So you can find the survey guides, carbon storage guide to download here, and you can find the data sheets just below here. So you're just looking for carbon storage field sheet. The other way you can do this, and it's normally easier to collect data on your phone if you can. We've got a really nice app, and you access, I'll show you exactly right now how to access that on your phone. It's the same way as you access it. What I'm showing you on the laptop is the same way as you will access it on your phone. So you go to your tiny forest. Let's just say we're in Dublin. And you can go straight to here, which are your surveys. And you will come to a page here with all of the different surveys that you need for your particular tiny forest that you're in at that time. And what you'll notice is that as you go down, you've also got the survey guide here, or you can start the survey. So both are possible. So we're going to start the survey, and I'll talk you through, I'll flick between the survey guide, which I've got here, and the survey, on the online version that you've got here. And you can still always access the survey guide from within the survey as well. It's always going to be at the top here. So you've always got that. Now, the first thing that you might, if you've not collected data at a tiny forest before, and I'm getting this because I've not collected it on my laptop before at tiny forest, my phone wouldn't show this up well, is we ask you to fill in a sort of informed consent form, just to say that you're aware of how the data is going to be used. We don't actually ask for any personal data in the tiny forest, and the any risks that could happen. So basically tripping over in the forest, things like that you're aware of those risks and that you take those risks on yourself. So that's what this is asking. And you can go and check our liability waiver and our data consent here. And if you've got any questions, please do email the Tiny Forest team. We're really happy to answer them. And it's up to you whether or not you want to collect the data and take part based on these forms. So you just have to say, I agree. And then we just ask for your full name and your email address, just so that if there is a problem at the end of something, we can link that you've agreed to the liability waiver and the data consent before you took part in our data collection. And then we ask, would you like to be kept in the loop? And you can sign up for that, for our newsletter, give you amazing emails, or not. It's completely up to you. The last thing I'd like to say on this is that, wait, I had it, it's got, oh, that you'll only get shown this once. We use cookies in your phone to work out whether or not you have signed this before. If you so if your cookies change, you'll see it again. If there's an update to the form, you'll see it again and have to fill it out again. But pretty much the only you won't see it again unless there's an update, or unless you've removed all the cookies from your phone or don't allow cookies. So don't worry, you're not going to see this every time you start. So you come in and you get this is the first page that you'll see of the tree survey, and it asks you first about a tree tag ID. And what that means, what that's asking you to do is go and look for tags that are on the tree, and we've tagged 100 different trees in your tiny forest, and those are the ones we want you to measure. Now, not all 100 tags are likely to be in your tiny forest. That's like, they get pulled off by animals, they seem to fall off, but they also get really buried in all of the mulch and things like that during the planting process. So do dig through the mulch a bit and see. I've found so many right at the bottom of a completely covered, right at the bottom of the tree, completely covered up. So do dig through the mulch to find trees. I tend to like try a really standard approach as I'm looking around the forest and go up and down in lines as I'm looking through the forest to find tags. And then I just dig at the bottom of every tree as well a little bit. And if you find a tag, when you find a tag on a tree, if you do find it on the main branch, sometimes it can be getting really constricted. And actually what can happen if you're not careful is the tree can start growing around the tag, and it really weakens the tree at that point. So if you see a tag on the main trunk of a tree, if you could take it off, and if you've got a side branch, put it on the side branch. If you don't have a side branch to put it on, if you could just really loosen it so it gives the tree as much space as possible to grow before it has to start growing around it. But the reason we want it on a side branch is because if a tree loses a side branch, it's much less damaging to the tree than it is if it breaks the trunk. Trees will often still survive that, but they have to start their growth all over again. So that's why we ask for you to re-tag, move the tag. So once you've found your tag number, it'll often be between 1 and 100, but sometimes where forests have been re-tagged for certain reasons, you'll find tags up to 200. So if we just put in number 1 here and we press next, then it will, and maybe I can show you a picture actually, so before we start with a tag. So this is what a lot of our tags look like. Can you see that? Maybe I'll have to zoom in. That there, can you see that? So a little metal disc with a number on it and a colourful, a coloured plastic thing that helps you to find it. Some of our forests do still have paper tags, but that's much less common. So that's very few of our forests have paper tags. But if you're at one of them, sometimes a white paper tag will have a number written on it as well. So it asks you, is this your study tree? So it gives you the tree that it thinks it is, Alder or Alnus glutinosa in this case of the one that I selected. It tells you also which layer it comes from. And so we'd like you to first and foremost, one of the things we'd like you to do is check whether or not it's the correct species or not. And you can do that with apps like Seek, is a really good one. Leaf Snap, I think, is another one. Divya, do you remember some of the others? I normally use
iNaturalist was one more, I guess.
Seek is the iNaturalist one that does it through AI. I record I'm not sure, but yeah, I normally use Seek. That tends to work mostly for me. And it doesn't always get you to species particularly well, but it does tend to get you to family and genus quite well. And then you can always also Google a little bit if you're not sure. So yeah, check the species, and this is this box here. Is the tree species assigned to this tree incorrect? So if it's not the right species, you can tick here and you can change it. I'm not going to do that because this is actually a live, I'm not going to submit this at the end either because this is a live survey for a particular site, but you can. Is your study tree dead? So how do you tell if your study tree is dead? If it's got leaves on it, just don't even bother about it. Don't worry about it. That's tree's alive if it's got green leaves on it. However, if it's looking sticky, if it's looking dried out, things like that, the best thing you can do is take your fingernail and just scrape the bottom of the tree right very near the soil, very near the base. And if it's green underneath there, your tree is still alive. If it's not, then your tree is likely dead. Trees actually can die from the top and still can resprout and grow because the roots can still be giving nutrients up to the stem. So just because a tree looks dead doesn't actually always mean that it is. So that scratch is important. If you tick that, you can just submit your survey straight away and move on to your next tree. However, let's say our tree isn't dead. Sometimes it'll ask you whether or not your tree is in the middle of the edge of the forest. If you get this, it means your tree's never been measured before, to be honest. It's the first measurement ever, because this stops appearing if it's been measured before and if this is answered. So middle means that you're more than 2 meters away from any pathway, classroom area, or fence sort of edge of the forest. An edge is all of that 2 meter area around any pathway, classroom, fence, etc. Here we've got a question that says, is the tree too tall for measure? It might not surprise you from that picture of Whitney and the growth rates I've told you that these forests become too tall to measure pretty fast. And it's really difficult in a dense forest like a Miyawaki forest to be able to see both the bottom of the tree and the top of the tree at the same time. And all methods pretty much to measure tree height when it's above the height that we can just reach require you to be able to see the bottom of the tree and the very top of the tree to do the calculation. So what we're going to ask you to do then is, if it is too tall to measure, just tick that box. You're not going to measure the height of the tree. You're then just going to move on to these 2 questions and measure diameter, because we can calculate an approximate height from the diameter of a tree. And we're actually, one of our active research questions is in Miyawaki forests, how does that relate? So we've got some we've got some master's students at the moment working on measuring lots of trees in tiny forests and their diameter, but trying to get really accurate estimates of the height so that we can create. So at the moment we can use tables that already exist, but we're aware that because Miyawaki forests might be putting their energy into growing up, they might not be putting as much energy into supporting that growth and growing outwards. So that's something we're testing. But in the meantime, we can use those other tables to still calculate height from the diameter that you give us. So that's the plan with this. So if you can measure the height of the tree, what you're going to do is you're going to get a tape measure. You need quite a long tape measure. I don't know if you've got a picture of it here. Well, this is a small version of it, but quite a long tape measure, and you're going to measure all the way up the trunk of the tree, all the way up, and you're going to measure the longest branch that you can. And you're not going to include the leaf in any measurement. You're going to measure to the end of the leaf, okay? So not the tip of the leaf, where it comes out of the trunk, not the tip. Does that make sense? The leaf is not included in the measurement. And it's the same principle if you're dealing with something like dog rose. You just try and find the longest stem that dog rose has, and you measure the length of the longest stem that dog rose has, because dog rose is one of those really multi-stem species, and it just goes off everywhere in loads and loads of different directions. So try and find the longest one, just measure the length of it. And with dog rose particularly, be careful of the spines. It can really catch your clothing and catch you a little bit. So be careful, it is a rose after all. So you're going to measure the tree height, and you're going to measure that in centimeters. So if your tree is over 1 meter tall, then you'd be saying it's 118 centimeters. 100 centimeters in a meter. So we're just going to say that our tree is 118 centimeters tall, just for. And then we ask this question here. Then this one's often a little tricky. It's how many stems does your tree have? And what we do not mean branches when we ask about stems. Stems come out of the ground, okay? So you need to, and they are not clearly joined. Like sometimes you find a tree and right just at the ground, you can see it's all one and it's coming out, but you can still see it's one branch. You can't see that, okay? They have to be coming out separately from the ground. And they will still be connected underneath, but that's how we define stems, okay? And this diagram here, so this helps you with the measurement on how to measure it. You're not measuring straight up down. And then here, this gives you an idea of multi-stemmed. So this has 2 stems here. One is this, and then this one here, because it's above the ground, would count as 2. It would count as 1. Yeah. So then you fill in your number of stems, and this allows us to get a more accurate estimation of the above ground biomass. But also by doing what we said, we're trying to stay really conservative in our measurements. We're not trying to overestimate the above ground biomass. We're not trying to overestimate the amount of carbon storage for us. We want to be conservative but as accurate as possible in our measurements. So when you measure your stem diameter, you're going to do that 10 centimeters above the ground. So 10 centimeters from the soil surface. If I show you it here, so that's what someone's measuring here. They're measuring 10 centimeters. And then you can do it in two ways. You can either measure using calipers if you have them, and some of you will, because some of you will have tree keeper kits and you can use the calipers. You just need to open them, use them down, close them, make sure it's in millimeters is probably the biggest error, and also make sure that it's perpendicular to the ground, that you're measuring, that you're not not necessarily perpendicular to the ground, but that it's perpendicular to the stem. So you're not measuring the stem diameter on a diagonal, because if you measure the stem diameter on a diagonal, you're automatically going to make the diameter bigger than it actually is. So you really want to be measuring it perpendicular to the stem, so that you're measuring the actual diameter. Those are probably the two biggest. Oh, and the other thing that people do sometimes with calipers is they don't use the tips, and they put the stem right up here. And if you put it right up by the ends of the calipers, by the ruler here, actually you're not measuring. They often have a little cutout there, and then you're not getting those couple of millimeters on either side. So again, it's an underestimation of what the true diameter of the tree stem is. The other way you can do it is you can do it using a ruler. So you can get a ruler and you can just hold it to the stem of the trunk of your tree, and you can make sure that the 1 centimeter is in line with the 1 centimeter is in line with one side, and you just measure the number of millimeters to the other side, and that is a diameter. We tested loads of different methods for doing this. We tried wrapping string around a tree and measuring string and then working out diameter from the circumference and things like that. The ruler was by far the most accurate method for replicating measuring with calipers. By far, it was so much more accurate. So this really does work as a method. So don't be worried about using a ruler. It works really well. Just try and be really specific about about lining it up correctly, and it will be grand. So then we'll put the value in millimeters. So we'll say 22. Now, if I'd put over 100 millimeters in, so if I'd put 109 millimeters, that would mean that my trunk is more than 10 centimeters in diameter. In which case, we would then ask that you measure up to at a height of 1.3 meters, so 130 centimeters from the ground. I haven't seen a tree yet in our tiny pod. This could be happening. This could be the first year we get one. I don't know. But at this moment, I have not seen a diameter over 100 centimeters. So might not be something to worry about right now, but we do, it's the reason we go from 10 centimeters to 130 centimeters is because there's a standard measurement when you're measuring trees called diameter at breast height. And breast height is considered to be 130 centimeters. So once the trees are big enough, we are moving to that standard measurement of trees. Obviously, we can't measure at that height in the first few years of life. So we are waiting until they get. And we also we want to be measuring it as the trunk. We don't want to be measuring like a spindly thing, because you could get to 100. You might have trees that are over 130 centimeters tall, but you might be measuring a diameter that's tiny, that's a centimeter at 130 centimeters, whereas actually at the trunk for most of the tree is much bigger than that. So then you'd be massively underestimating carbon storage. So whilst we're trying to be conservative, we're trying to be accurate at the same time. So it's a bit like that. So once you've got your data entered, just have a quick scan over, check that it's all correct, and then you can submit it using this button here. Okay. And once you've pressed submit, then you'll go back to your list of takes you back to this list of surveys. And you can just click carbon storage again and do the next one. Carbon storage again and do the next one. Yeah, so that's how, so you can just keep going. And as I said, it's really helpful just from your own self as well to really work in a logical pattern as you go through. And that way, even if you can't get them all done in a day, but you want to come back, but you have that ambition to let them all done, you can kind of come back another day and know where you left off or something like that. Whereas if you're just going sporadically around the forest, you really don't know what proportion you've collected. It's also, I don't know, for me, I like to feel like I'm getting a task done, and I can figure out like how much more I really have left to do and feel like I'm completing it if I work kind of in lines around it. But you also choose your own method. If that's the method that works best for me, if it doesn't work for you, if you then choose your own method. It's up to you, Divya.
One of the tree keepers in this is Cambridge Fight Trees Stand Forest. So they used a string. So they actually tied a long twine from one end of the fence to the other, and they would just check all the trees along that string, and then just move the tree that they have checked on top of the string. So that way they're kind of moving along.
That's a great idea when the forests are like super small.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with the tiny ones, yes.
Much more difficult when they get overhead height.
Absolutely.
But no, that is a fantastic idea for when the trees are really small. That's a great way of knowing what you've done.
Yeah, we'll wait and see what innovative ways they come up with this year.
If you have your own, let Divya know, because we're always intrigued about the ways that people do it, and then we can suggest that in future trainings and things like that. So it's perfect. So that's our methodology. And as I said, there's also a training video that you can watch on our YouTube channel, which I'll put the link to that in the chat. I'm afraid it's me again. Sorry about that. There you go. So if you have any questions, you can also watch that training video, and that gives you info on how to measure trees. And then finally, we've got this, you've got these online forms that do exactly the same thing. So if you don't want to take your phone out into the tiny forest and do it on your phone, sorry, get us back to the right one. Then you can print off these carbon storage survey forms. You'll need quite a few. You can print them off double-sided. They are meant to be double-sided. They come as 2 pages. And that asks you all of the same information as we've gone through in the app. And then we would ask that when you come back home that you fill it in on your desktop if you do use the online version, the paper version, because otherwise we don't have your data if you don't do that. So it'd be really helpful if you could do that, please. And then how to get involved in Carbon Week. You really just need to grab your tape measure, grab a ruler, and go out. Share them with your friends, take people along with you. You don't have to go alone. In fact, we encourage people to go with people. It's often nice to take a drink and stuff like that with you, like some tea and coffee in case it's a bit chilly, but you also get amazing weather in September. So make sure you have water as well, sunscreen, because you will be outside. A hat is always a good idea. And yeah, it's accessible to anyone, so bring people along. And yeah, Divya.
We have a question from Karen.
Yeah.
In the chat, so she says, how do we measure the trees when the gaps between them reduces as the shrubs and ground layer grows? So like, how do you try to
sometimes getting through a forest can be a tricky thing. As much as possible, try and just wiggle through like avoiding the branch. I've done that a bit. It's not always easy, but that's kind of the way we do it, is we sort of pull through the forest as much as possible to find them. If you really can't, dog rows is a really hard one to get around. Then maybe some gardening gloves to move the plants as much as possible and things like that. But we're really not trying to cut any plants or anything, any of the trees or anything like that at the moment, because actually that's then not storing the carbon anymore. So it actually releases the carbon that was stored in those trees. So we need to try and keep them intact as much as possible. Divya, do you have a better idea?
No, it's pretty much the same. But then I was thinking, like, just with the thinning question, because we had this asked at another tiny forest. So again, with shrubs like dog rose and stuff, like if we allow it to grow, it kind of becomes top heavy in a year's time. But then if you trim it or try to thin it down, then it starts branching from the bottom, which means it will be bottom heavy all through. So like in which case the access to the forest kind of gets closed later on in the year. So like, yeah, for the first few years, just let it grow. I can play a video of the Whitney tiny forest to show you how we wiggle through. Yes, we do have a lot of people wiggling videos, so I'll pop that in the chat as well. But yeah, just bear with the forest for the first couple of years, and after that you can easily walk through it.
And I would say what you might find is in some tiny forests you've got a lot of plants that we haven't planted. And you can take secateurs or something like that and cut those. So thistles, nettles, things like that, we don't need in the tiny forest, because they're currently competing with the tree species that we've planted. As soon as the canopy closes, those plants are going to be there in much, much lower numbers because they won't be getting the light and resources they need. But we would still like you to kind of leave it around the forest or something like that, so the nutrients will still break down and go back into the soil. But yeah, and if there's a lot of seed heads, just try and keep those further away from the forest, but that's really hard. But yeah, you can just take some secateurs and cut those, because that can sometimes it's actually the thistles and things like that can make it really hard to get through the forest as well. Thistles and dog rose, I think, are some of the hardest things. And then yeah, it's wiggling through trees. Okay, and just to so grab people, go along 16th to 24th of September 2023 is when to go. And if you're not already a tree keeper and you want to become a tree keeper, please sign up. You'll get all of Divya's amazing emails. If you take friends along with you and they want to become a tree keeper, also pass them on to us, pass them on to Divya, or send Divya a note with their email address, and she will talk to them and let them know how they can become a tree keeper and what's involved. But so that's basically how you get involved in Carbon Week. And do we have any more questions about this in the chat, or does anyone want to turn their microphone off and ask? Yes, Alexander.
Well, I want to say thanks for telling us about more of the Carbon Week. It's really interesting to learn about, and I'm really looking forward to actually doing it now. But I was wondering, is there any way of like estimating how much sort of like carbon is stored in the underground biomass or the roots and things, or is that not possible at the moment?
So it's a complex measurement that is difficult to do without sort of scanning from above ground. We don't have that technology, which is one of the reasons we don't do it, and it's too expensive to buy and send to all of you guys. So it's not something we're even really considering. We might try and consider doing it as a part of a research collaboration to understand how the roots networks might be different in Miyawaki forests as opposed to in conventional planting methods. But it's not something we're really considering at the moment as a citizen science methodology, unfortunately. But it's definitely a really interesting, because the trees are so closely planted together and developing like that so fast. Yeah, it's a really interesting method. You can often, though, guess that most trees, if you look at the canopy breadth, that's a good indication of approximately how wide the root system might be as well, generally, as a general rule of thumb. But yeah, no, not something to do.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that makes more sense. I mean, I did think you might say it would be very hard or difficult or expensive to measure it, because I imagine it's very difficult to do that, because obviously you can't actually see the tree roots, they're stuck in the soil. Yeah, it's difficult to get access to them, that sort of thing. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's something we're really interested in, though, for sure. So it's a great question. Andrew.
Well, I've got a quick question. I've not actually started planting any tiny forest myself yet, but I'm just curious from the point of view of data science collection. Is it possible to get your feedback on the data you've uploaded to try and work out how much carbon might have been sequestered by your tiny forest? Or is it basically just the mass data collection stage and you're not necessarily at the individual feedback stage? Or
So I was trying to stop sharing screen. Sorry, I can't figure out how to do that right now. It'd be nice if I could look at, if I could, let me see if I, no, I can't. Stop video. Oh no, that's me. Sorry. Right, I'll just do it. I'm afraid you'll have to keep looking at this any question slide. So Andrew, we are mostly at the mass. For us to analyze it, we're mostly at the mass analysis stage, and we produce a wrap up to Carbon Week that you can see the video from last year's on our website, and we also produce an end of year report that generally gets released in January. So January 2024 is when you would expect to see that. However, as a tree keeper, and actually it's a great reason why that I haven't stopped sharing my screen, because I can show you, if you sign in as a tree keeper and go to your forest, well, you will have your forests here. I have every tiny forest in the UK because of course I do, but you will just have one, maybe two if you've got more than them. But you can see this button up here that says export data. Yeah. If you click on that, it will export all of the data collected for your tiny forest. Okay. So you have access to all of that data and you can analyze that yourself. And if you look at last year's carbon storage, we go through the calculation that we use to calculate the above ground carbon storage by the forests. So that information is there already. Also, if you go into your tiny forest profile, you can look at your survey results here on the side tab here. And so you can go into carbon storage, and I might have found oh yeah, no, it's got data. Sometimes it's in an event, sometimes it's in, but you can also just look at all the data that's been collected here. So if you're in the field and you're monitoring and you want to go, wait, and you sort of see a tag as you're about to leave that you're not 100% sure whether you got it, you can also look back here and just scroll down on this and say, did I get that one today? And things like that. So that's a sort of, or if you messed up a measurement and you want to correct it, you can also correct it sometimes in here. But you can also let us know if there's a problem.
Okay, thanks.
No worries.
And I was wondering, is there a way of, if there's tiny forest that does not have any tags or not many tags,
Yes.
and there are still tree keepers who are willing to measure their way around it?
Thank you, Divya, for that question. At the moment, I'm afraid there's no way of measuring if you don't have tags in your forest. We are looking at other methods for measuring tiny forests, and we are also looking at retagging. So the most useful thing you can do if you don't have tags in your forest is let us know that you don't have any, or that you have very low numbers. That's the other thing. If you have low numbers of tags in a tiny forest, please let us know. We've tagged 100 trees. So if you're below kind of 70 tags in your forest, we'd really love 80 to 70 tags. If you've got less than that, it's really useful to let us know. It's not that we're necessarily replace your tags when you've got less than 70 or less than 80, but it's really useful for us to know, because especially if we do end up looking at introducing another methodology or something like that, it's really useful for us to know that if you've got very low numbers, we might look at retagging. So please do let us know if you're not finding like 70 or 80 tags in your forest. Yes, Andrew.
Obviously, at the start, you mentioned tiny forest being 600 meters squared.
200 squared.
200 meters squared, sorry. Is it possible to have actually larger ones, or would you then break them up into smaller ones so that this method of 100 trees in the fixed size still works? How does that dynamic play out? So
we've only actually ever planted smaller. I mean, we get slightly over 205 meters squared. Doesn't really count, does it? We've definitely planted smaller, and then we reduced the number of trees in the forest to keep the the distance the same. We have had requests to do larger forests, and what we've done in that stage is we've planted two 200-meter square forests next to each other. The only reason we've ever planted smaller than 200 meters squared is because it physically wouldn't fit in the space. It's not part of what we do. And the one of the reasons that we're doing this right now like this is, well, apart from 200 meters squared being a fairly good urban size for urban areas, urban land is incredibly difficult to find that you can use. So small areas tend to work quite well. The other reason is that we're thinking of these as living labs, and so we want them to be comparable. So that's why, so it keeps it comparable if we have them the same size, similar methodologies. It's something that we're definitely looking at and considering. There are many potential ecological benefits to having larger tiny forests, but it's weighing that up between the costs of planting larger ones, the desirability, and the logistics and things like that as well as then it being a useful research tool. We do have one in Knowlesgate that's planted, that's 3 tiny forests next to each other, so 600 meters square pretty much, but we did plant them as 3 tiny forests, but very, very close to each other, next to a conventional planting method, so that's also 600 meters square, so we'll be able to directly compare those two. We've also got 2 in Speen that are next to each other, directly next to each other as well, with just a very small gap in between. One is rotivated and one is excavated down to 1 meter deep. Again, really nice comparison. We've got others that have the rotivation, meter depth excavation. So we try, and when we do plant close together, we try and use the 200 meter square to set up a really nice paired opportunity for analysis. Yeah.
I have another question that came up in one of the questions in the inbox. So is there a problem if we measure the same tree multiple times? Is that a problem, or do we have to make
Not a problem at all. What we'll do is we'll use those measurements to create an average. So you're just getting the measurement for that tree more and more accurate. If those measurements are taken more than a few months apart, then we'll treat it differently. But it's particularly when it's within the same week, which is what we'll be analysing carbon week. We will use that as an average in that period of time.
I'm just trying to think of questions that came up. Any other questions?
Does anyone else have any? I would just say, if you do go to a forest and you need to do some weeding, I hate the word weeds because I'm an ecologist and it's such a anthropocentric view of plants, weeds. So but in the tiny forest instance, I feel like I can use it because we do want the trees to grow. We are looking for the benefits of the forest. If you do feel you need to do some weeding, secateurs are great just for chopping things down and moving things out. If you do start pulling things out, look out for a tree right next to it. You can disturb their roots. You can pull up trees sometimes with over-enthusiastic. And I try and avoid taking a shovel because of the potential effects on the tree's root systems and because of the increased risks of pulling up other trees nearby. So, as I say, as soon as the canopy closes, pretty much you're going to be, those weeds aren't going to exist as much anymore. So we can, just slowing their growth, slowing the amount of competition that they can have is good. But especially if you see a tree struggling, try and make sure there aren't any weeds around it. Is definitely a good thing to do, because trees do sometimes struggle, particularly. I mean, we've had quite a lot of nice rain this summer, which I know hasn't made anyone actually happy, but it's relieved us this year compared to last year, because the trees are a lot happier. They're not fighting for water as much. But I've definitely seen, particularly with oak trees, even with just like a big clump of grass, them having much drier leaves next to a big clump of grass than away from it. So it's amazing. Yeah. So sometimes you wouldn't expect just a big clump of grass to be having such an effect sometimes on a tree, but it really can. And oak trees seem particularly to suffer one of the earliest, I think, from my observations. I don't know if Divya feels the same, but yeah. Alexander.
With the oak trees suffering from competition, I've noticed that in our tiny forest, we've had areas we used to have a big problem with a lot of oaks, which we managed to get pulled out, thankfully, from help from the council. But I noticed that some oak trees, particularly, it seemed to me that the most sickly looking ones always be close to massively tall oaks or like long grass and stuff. So it seemed to really cause them problems having that competition.
Yeah, I think they really struggle much more with lack of water than some of the other species. I've just been to a tiny forest recently in Portugal, well, a micro forest. It's not planted by us. A micro forest in Portugal. Oh no, they call it fast forest. Sorry, in Portugal. And they've planted some oaks native to Portugal, of course, and the oaks were having the hardest time, and they've been having close to 40-degree weather where I was.
Yeah, and
So yeah,
we did have also a few like last year, because of, first of all, the drought, and also just generally there was a lot of powdery mildew issue with the oaks. But then they seem to have done well this year, so like it might have just slowed their growth down a bit, but then they're thriving now.
it doesn't always cause the death. Like sometimes they can still be getting water from it. Just might slow, these things might just slow growth and things like that. Powdery mildew tends to slow growth rather than killing trees. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if I could share a video of the Whitney tiny forest.
Absolutely.
So this is yeah, I don't know if you guys can see it. Let me play this. So this was the updated one from what Claire showed in her video, in her presentation. So this was just a little after planting, so May 2020.
Yeah, Whitney was planted in March 2020 for those people.
And this is, yeah, and that's in May 2022. And a year later, so this is the latest we've got, so that's May 2023, and you can see how different the growth is. And this is what I wanted to point out about the weeds. So again, if you can see the forest floor there, Whitney now doesn't have the problem of weeds anymore. So as you can see, the canopies have closed. So you don't have any problem with things competing with the trees anymore, because they're established. We have a bit of a visual of the canopy now. Everything's closed. And yeah, so we did have to crawl around a little bit to get to the trees and the tiles. And this is one of our tiny forests in Netherlands. So that's the oldest one. That's 8 years old. And as you can see, the trees are like, yeah, it now looks like a proper woodland. So yeah. Whoops. Okay. So yeah, hope, any other?
So I've just seen another question by Karen. Their tags seem to ours. What do you recommend replacing ours with, or adding extra something so it's easier to find the tags? So as I said, like if you don't have enough tags in the forest, do get in contact with us, because we now use the little metal tags. Whitney was our first ever planted forest, and so yes, we were testing out different methodologies, but so it has a different tag method again, but we now use the metal tags. Eventually they could be nailed into a tree. Those are the right ones for doing that once the tree gets big enough. So that's part of the idea of starting by using those as well. But also, if we're retagging, we need to make sure that we know that it's a retag tree. So we need to start from 101 and so forth, and so that we can populate the database properly, and so that it shows up correctly on your survey. We need to know the proportions and which trees are being tagged. So it's much better if we send that out to you guys, as ideally, could you tag like this?
But I
And we
think
will send you
Karen's
tags and everything like that as well.
I think Karen's question was around how to find the tags, like how to make it more visible. So because the plastic bits are tiny and they kind of get covered with old growth. So maybe something to kind of make it pop, or I don't know.
Yeah, so do you not find that plastic flag thing that we attach that's colourful sufficient to find them? I know it can get covered a bit.
Yeah, I'm
Are
thinking
you
what
asking?
else.
Yeah, we've got like the little tiny plastic colourful plant tags that are attached to the numbers on a bit of twisty tie. But it's so difficult to find because the plastic tags come off because obviously the hole is quite close to the end of the point, so some of them are broken. And for some of the children to try and find the little tiny metal tags, it's become a bit difficult. And we've got about 4 or 5 that are definitely dead trees because they're sitting by the benches that have got tags on. So we weren't sure what to do with those.
Well, so those ones you can mark as dead on the platform. Well, were they never planted, or were they?
I think there's 1 or 2 that were never planted, and we've just sort of kept them so that we know whenever we're doing monitoring.
You can look up, you can put them on a tree and still measure, because that tree was never planted. So it's not, we had wanted to use dead to indicate like mortality rate in the forest, because so many tags are being lost naturally. That's becoming harder and harder, but we don't really want to be marking a tree as dead because it was never planted, because it never had a chance. So because we still, if you get enough data from enough forests over enough time, you can estimate mortality rate, even though we're losing a lot of tags and we're just not seeing them reappear. If you're telling us dead, and we can use that to look at the number of tags that are being measured, then we can start working out proportions from that, particularly if we have lots and lots of forests to compare. So what I do is, on those ones, you can put them on a new tree, and then start measuring those trees. And ideally, if you could look up online what tree it would have been on and find the same species, that would be great.
Yeah, that's what we talked about doing that. So yeah, great.
Yeah, and that's a great way of learning identification skills of trees, like to be like, what's a leaf look like? Let's go and try and find that tree, that species, and let's put a tag on it. The other thing, if you are, so those plastic tags, what I do at the moment is you can just, as I said, you can undo if you find just a metal one, you can undo it, undo the wire, and you could put something that you think is going to be more bright and colourful. It doesn't really matter what something durable, bright and colourful that you think will be easier to find. And if it works, please send it to us. Maybe we'll take that.
So there's like tent type material.
Yeah,
so that's waterproof and you can get it in all sorts of different colours.
Yeah, or milk cartons or something that you can just cut off and then put. I mean, they could be still bigger if you want them to be found easily, I think.
Yeah, just want it so it's a bit easier for the children to be able to identify them.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I've got and anyway, we want you to take on a main branch, we want you to be moving it onto a side branch as well. So a lot of people will be untwisting those tags anyway for that reason. So whilst you've got them untwisted, you might as well add it. And it's more important that you can find the metal tag and be able to find that over time. There's no point having a metal tag on a tree that no one can find, and then the tree might grow over it or something because no one can find it, or something might happen. So that's absolutely useless. That's not what it's there for. So yeah. And sorry, I misunderstood your question.
Yeah, Karen is from William Torbett School, so yeah, it could be like an activity for the children to cut out different tags and then try to read.
Definitely, yes.
That's
a job for year 6.
Yeah.
It sounds like such a fun activity to make different types of tags, and they can really add personality to it as well, which would be super fun.
And another element I would like to add is like carbon storage is another way of having a long-term connect with your forest, because you're going there year after year and you recognize these trees, they're the same tag trees, so you kind of grow back every year to see how they're doing, and you kind of connect with them at a deeper level. So it's a good way of bonding with your forest and enhancing that nature connectedness element as well.
And if you are lucky enough, if you do have our packs, and if you do have the tree keeper pack, you can it's not the tricky part, the kit from the monitoring kit, and you have the guides. Those guides on tree species identification are really great and useful. And it becomes really fun. Some of their tips on how to identify, I always remember the difference between silver birch and downy birch, and it's so fun to just feel along the stem or feel a leaf and feel whether it's soft and fluffy and downy, like downy birch, or warty, and then you walk around a forest somewhere else completely different, you see a birch and you're like, oh, I wonder if that's a silver or downy or a completely different species. But it's really the way that interaction takes you even outside different forests, of just learning different trees and sort of learning some of the tips and tricks for identifying them is really fun. For me, I found it fun anyway. Over time.
Any other questions? Yes, I'm just aware that we are 5 minutes over. So if not, you can always write to us on the Tiny Forest email ID. And yeah, thank you so much. Happy Carbon Week, everyone. And
yeah, happy Carbon Week. I hope you guys enjoy it. I think, is there another one of these trainings happening before? I think there is, isn't there?
yes, there is a Q&A session later. So yeah, if you do have any questions, you can always come back there, or you can write to us. You can reach us in very many ways.
And Daniel and Sophie, I think it is the plan at the moment, we'll be doing a wrap up of all our Carbon Week results about a month or so after Carbon Week. So look out for that as well.
Yeah, and we also have a recording of the previous year's Carbon Week discussion. So if you are curious about the formula that's used and how Claire and her team calculate the amount of carbon stored, you can look at the video. So it's on our Tree Keeper playlist on the YouTube. So yeah, if you can just scroll in there, you'll get the recording from that. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. So
Thank you, everyone.
have a good rest of the day. Hopefully the sun has peeked out a little bit. Looks like it has here, but thank you so much. See you.
Bye, thanks, enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.